And that night she went home and she peacefully passed away in her sleep. And her husband called the next day and told us what had happened and thanked us. And it was just kind of an interesting way, interesting introduction into the whole world of healthcare. Health is so important on so many aspects, but it's the way that we die is just as important as the way that we live. Or we identify this idea that I've got, degeneration in my body, and therefore it's never going to be fixed, and I have to modify everything in my life. But really, what happens when we lose that identity, when we let that die, that's when we really can come to life and when the real healing takes place. Every peptide in your body gets depleted as you age, which is why I think it's incredibly risky not to refill your peptides, not to get the stem cells renewed on a regular basis. You're putting your health at risk. All right, everybody, it's Reagan Archibald with the Unreasonable Health Podcast. This is the place where I look out there and I say there's way too many people who are sick, and I don't want you to be one of those. So I share with you the latest insights on medical therapies, innovation, peptides, lab reviews, and everything so that you can optimize your health in feeling, looking, and performing your best. So I appreciate everyone who was on our Health Accelerator Challenge last night. Not only did we have a phenomenal turnout, but we've seen people's lives just completely change because they've done one thing, and one thing only, is they have made their health their number one priority. At East West Health, our core philosophies, there's three things that we believe in more than anything. And number one is that when your health improves, everything improves. And this includes your relationships, your gratitude for life, your experience of having physical fitness and healthy activities. Your business improves. We've seen people's financial lives improve substantially when they've made their health their priority. The second core philosophy is when there's no death by neglect. So when we deny ourselves or ignore our health, that's called neglect. And if you look at anything in life, the more if we don't put any attention to it, that thing gets weaker and weaker, and there's no physical process, physical fitness. There's nothing that can circumvent that. So no death by neglect means getting the right tests ordered, really looking deeper at the underlying cause, and then doing what's needed so that you can have the best health of your life. And then the third thing is we want to make your next decade your best decade. And so imagine that you could go back 10 years into the past, and you could change what you did for your health in the last 10 years. What would that be? And last night, that was one of the challenges from the Health Accelerator course before. But last night, we got some insights from our participants, and many people, they said, I would go back and tell myself to exercise more, to stress less, to have more relaxation in my life. I would, the advice I would give myself, Kate said, I would give myself the advice to take more peptides and, make it easier to optimize my health. And, other people said, hey, I would give myself more advice, like to take my health more seriously and to start eating the way that I'm eating now. If I would have done that 10 years ago, imagine how much farther ahead I'd be. Because, I think if we look at our health, the biggest changes happen in our health over the course of 3 years. That's when our biology completely transforms. And so I just want to thank you guys for being part of this community, for being so involved and so engaged. And I really appreciate the effort and the hard work that you put into your health, because it shows. I mean, every day when I have the beautiful chance to go into our center there in the Salt Lake Valley, it's so cool seeing people looking younger and younger, getting more and more fit. I saw one of you on the treadmill yesterday with Nikki, one of our fitness advisors. And it was amazing to see you because your body's made such a transformation. And you probably know who you are, but you're in your 70s. And you look better now. And I've known you for over 10 years, but you look better now than you did in your 60s. And you're more vibrant. You have greater strength. You have more confidence. The confidence is the big thing that I see is when you start shifting your health, your confidence just goes through the roof. So my hat's off to each one of you for making your health a priority and for being on this. So we'll get started with the show today. It's just me, so I apologize. It's going to be a bit of a monologue. Sometimes they are. We've got some awesome guests coming up, but sometimes I just like to chat with you guys and, kind of share with you what I'm learning, and hopefully it inspires you to do something different for your health, or maybe just inspires you to keep going on the process. I think consistency is the real key to the overall health journey. The more consistent that the people are, the better that their health is. And, I was meeting with one of you and I read your blood labs last night, and it was so fun to see because all that you were focused on, and I think a lot of us can relate, but, as I met with this individual, he's 62, and he's like, and we're coming up to the end of his program, and he's getting, he just signed up for our longevity optimization, our 12-month program. And he said, I just don't, I made progress, but I'm looking at my blood labs and analyzing it. And there's so many areas that I still haven't made progress. And actually, once we started dialing it in, we're like, well, your liver's made a 30% improvement. His blood sugar, his blood sugar made like probably a 40% improvement. I mean, all these areas have he's made exceptional improvements. And I said, imagine if you did nothing with this. And sometimes we want our health to be fixed permanently in like this short span of time, and we beat ourselves up and we don't look into the past. And so, I shared with them a quote that I heard from Dan Sullivan that I think it's worth repeating here on the podcast. And what Dan Sullivan said is he said, if you want to get people ambitious about their future, they have to be confident in their past. And this is a brand new quote. I was on Dan Sullivan's Age Reversal Future just on Tuesday. And that quote was so powerful because if you want to get people ambitious about their future, you've got to get them confident about their past. And so, we just went back through the past and we said, well, what changes have you made? And we started realizing that there's been a lot less alcohol. There's been a lot less sugar. There's been more exercise. He's able to move from fit to fitter on the Fitness 50 category. And I'm like, this progress is exceptional. Imagine if you went into the conventional medical world and you asked your primary care doctor, you're like, hey, I have all these longevity goals. I want to live to be like 150. Can you help me? Your doctor is going to be like scratching his head, like, well, no, but I can give you high blood pressure medication. If you have hypertension, we can look at your cholesterol. I can get you on a statin and maybe that will help. Or, maybe if your members stop functioning, your reproductive glands, so I can give you some Cialis or tadalafil or whatever. I mean, there's just not a lot of thought in medicine around how to optimize your health. And so one of the things I'm going to encourage each one of you to do is to start reframing your past and start looking at your past. And this is where I've actually, as many of you are, I'm somebody who has very high expectations of myself and my life. And there's moments where I just start feeling like, oh man, I'm just not doing enough. And especially when I meet with one of my patients and I'm like, man, we just haven't made the progress I'd like to see. And usually, I oversee pretty much all the patient care. And sometimes I get called in so I can go and do some investigative work on, what is it in the labs? What did we miss? What pathway didn't we open up? And where do we need to be better? And so it's hard not to take those things personal. And so, I've tried to learn over the years, like, hey, doing the best that I can do is the best I can do. And just recognizing it's a learning process. But if I go back into my future and I say, or back into my past and I say, well, what have I done in my past that's been really helpful and accelerated my knowledge? And I don't know if this is helpful for you, but when I look back into my past, I think one of the best traits that I have and I've kept with me is learning how to learn from the best of the best. And it goes beyond just like the squeaky wheel. Yes, showing up is half of the battle. But I remember my very first teacher, Dr. Maekawa, being in Hawaii. One of my mentors in Utah, Dr. Tautani, said, find a mentor when you go there. The best way to learn the medicine is not in school. It's not from books, but you've got to pass your boards and get licensed. But beyond that, that's 5%. The 95% is actually finding a mentor. And so I kept hearing about Dr. Maekawa and all these miracle stories of people. One of the ladies that I met, she said, Dr. Maekawa, my son had hit his head and he went blind. The concussion was so severe, and she brought his eyesight back. And another guy was like, my shoulder was frozen for 2 years and it was released. And so I said, I got to meet Dr. Maekawa. And so I called her on the phone. And of course she said, I'm not taking students. No, thanks. And so, I started studying a little bit, and I asked around. I said, hey, do you know Dr. Maekawa? And then someone introduced me, and she said I can come and just clean her clinic, and that was it. So I said, look, I'd love to volunteer, do some work for you, help you out on the clinic. And so I would clean her clinic and sweep the deck off and take care of the sheets and stuff like that. And I did that for about 2 months. And in the Japanese culture, there's not this, like, you don't just pay somebody money and they teach you. It's a different philosophy where, after about 2 months, she finally says, all right, Reagan, you can come into the room and watch me treat. And she had these little side conversations that we'd have. And when the clinic was closed, she was very generous with her time, but she never really let me engage and be part of the whole process. And so my very first time with her was watching her mentor one of her patients who had terminal cancer. 7 years, this lady had been hanging on for dear life. And my teacher got to the truth of the matter. And she said, your life, your family, your husband, your kids, you're hanging on for them, aren't you? And she said, yes, I worry about them. If I die, what's going to happen? Who's going to take care of the family? And my teacher just spoke the truth. And she said, when you die, you can now take better care of your kids, better care of your husband. They'll feel your love. They'll feel your abundance, your energy, even more so. And it just alleviated this lady's, the pressure of staying alive. And that night she went home and she peacefully passed away in her sleep. And her husband called the next day and told us what had happened and thanked us. And it was just kind of an interesting way, interesting introduction into the whole world of healthcare and recognizing that, health is so important on so many aspects, but it's the way that we die is just as important as the way that we live. And some of us hang on to life and hang on, even if we're in a complete disease state, which I think is incredibly noble. But there comes a time when we've got to let go. And I think that's the same thing that happens as we identify with disease. We identify with the fact that I've got an autoimmune disease, or, and I identified with that for a long time. Or we identify this idea that I've got, degeneration in my body, and therefore it's never going to be fixed. And I have to modify everything in my life. But really what happens when we lose that identity, when we let that die, that's when we really can come to life and when the real healing takes place. And so what I learned from Dr. Maekawa is, in order to learn those valuable lessons, and that's still one of the most valuable lessons I've learned in my practice in 20 years of practicing, and this was almost 25 years ago when this happened. But I've learned that, letting old patterns die and letting things that don't serve you anymore, letting those die helps everybody around us. And so So in learning from the best of the best, I remember when we got into regenerative medicine and stem cell therapy, and I was so fascinated by it. I would go up to the U and I went through all of their, labs that they had. And this was, almost 15 years ago. And then I met Elliot Spencer at Utah Cord Bank about 10 years ago. And I started, I was like, oh, you've got flow cytometry and can you do a colonizing forming unit? And so I learned how to test products because there were so many out there at the time, and everybody had like the best one. And so I learned actually all the science behind it, how to test it. And in learning, how it works in the scientific world from, working with PhDs and people in labs, that opened up so many doorways that I wouldn't have had if I didn't learn the way that if I didn't have the understanding of what it takes to learn from a scientist and the questions to ask. I would have had doors shut more than doors open. And it's the same thing with Dr. Maekawa. In the Japanese culture, you just wait for the teacher to accept you as a student. You just can't force yourself on them. In the scientific world, and this is, I know there's a lot of you who are very interested in going deeper into the science, and many of you are working with, pharmacists, doctors, things like that. And so one of the things that I've uncovered is, if you can figure out what they're most interested in, and this is where, getting the chance to mentor under Elliot Spencer, he's like double PhD, very smart individual, but learning how to ask the questions on how we're testing this. What does he see in the future? What's he done in the past that didn't work as far as regenerative medicine, stem cell therapy goes? What is actually in the perinatal tissue product? And I started getting into peptides, the exosomes, all the signaling factors. I learned from Otto Kaplan. I learned from Neil Reardon. And I would go to all the conferences, and I was willing to ask the questions that were really uncomfortable because sometimes I just didn't know. And I was like, what is a CFU? And then it's like, oh, well, the CFU, what that stands for is a colonizing forming unit. And what that means is it's a way that you can take a stem cell and culture it and put it in an environment where you can see if it will actually form a culture. Can it populate itself? Are there daughter cells from the stem cell? And that's one of the factors that you can look at when it comes to, is this a real stem cell or not? And I just thought that was fascinating. And so I started studying deep into that. And then I actually tested different products to see if if there is a CFU assay that could be performed. And it made all the difference in the world because now I'm speaking their language, similar to Dr. Maekawa, is understanding what her language was. Her language was one of, hey, you got to serve, you've got to, you've got to show that you're actually sincere and committed to this process. She was not interested in working with people who, weren't there for the long run. And actually, through my commitment to have a great mentor and to learn from the best of the best, what happened about 6 months later is I said, Dr. Maekawa, I have all these classmates, and I went to a school that was very small. I mean, they accepted 8 students per year. It was in Hawaii, and it was a very nuanced, like Eastern and Western integrated medical school, which I loved because of the size, and actually got this really cool hands-on learning experience that I think a lot of my colleagues just missed that part of life. But I said, hey, I've got these other students who would love to learn from you. How open-minded are you to, opening up a class, and we can all learn from you. And then, she was like, I'll try it once. And she brought the students in, and things were very strict, very tight. If, she made a lot of the students leave in tears because she would just, she called it as it is. She told the truth. In our education system today, I think, and some of you may disagree with me, and that's fine. But I think we're way too soft. We don't tell people where they're being misled or where they're going off track. And so it takes a lot longer for students to learn if they don't have a real mentor there that's saying, no, you did it wrong. And sometimes we're more worried about feelings than we're worried about people understanding the truth and where they can course correct. And so I've tried to, take my teacher. She was very harsh. I mean, I saw her put patients in tears. She told this dentist once, she's like, you're getting fat and you're going to keep getting fatter as long as you keep making these decisions. And I don't want to see you ever again if you're not willing to make changes. And that comes off so harsh, but in her culture, that is okay. And she was very, she spoke in the Japanese language, the more masculine side, because there's a feminine and a masculine in the language. And so I don't know the language well enough at all I had friends who spoke both languages. And so in her mind, that's the best way she could help somebody. I've tried to gear it down where I can, share people, here's what's going to happen if we don't make changes. I had a client yesterday and I'm like, your homocysteine levels are 12. They're twice as high as where we wanted to be. And the problem with this is when you become 80, it's not heart disease, it's not cancer, it's Alzheimer's. But until you get there, this oxidative stress and this lack of glutathione production is going to really cause a breakdown in your health. And so we've got to fix this. And how we fix this is you've got to get off the chemicals. Part of it is, he was drinking too much. He had too many recreational drugs, and then he wasn't eating the right foods. Fast food, it will not help you get to where you want to go in your health goals. But just calling those things out, but having an objective marker to show that seems to be really helpful. But then you move on and you go and you say, okay, well, how are scientists communicating? And I find that a lot of those, when we're talking in the regenerative medicine world, the stem cells, it's all about, cell function. And then once I started getting into peptides about a decade ago, and talking to pharmacists and attending all the conferences, asking the dumb questions, because I was the beginner in the room, and I still try to put myself as the beginner in the room so that I can learn more about this, starting to learn how some of these peptide pathways work and understanding it's like, well, so what is it? So epitalin is a telomerase enzyme. What does that even mean? And just getting something so granular where, in science, sometimes it's implied that everybody knows, what that means and everybody understands these pathways. But actually, sometimes the way that one person knows something and the way that another person knows something, these are two different things. And so with epitalin, what a telomerase enzyme is it's this naturally occurring peptide. It's a structure of amino acids that are folded together in a very specific way. And the way that these molecule bonds are folded, that creates the energetic expression that turns on the cell. And so it's really powerful because what it can do is that telomerase enzyme can actually lengthen. It grows the telomeres on the end of your DNA, and it's like pulling your shoelaces tight. So if you think of your shoelaces being super loose, then what happens is the shoe can fall off once you start climbing that hill. And if you want to go, deeper in your health journey, you want to silence your DNA. And if you read David Sinclair's book, Lifespan, you'll see that there's so much on this topic and sirtuin activation. But just by having telomere enzymes activated in your body again, because they dwindle as we age, just like every peptide in your body gets depleted as you age, which is why I think it's incredibly risky not to refill your peptides, not to get the stem cells renewed on a regular basis. You're putting your health at risk. And so, but just by me asking the question, what is that? What is a telomerase enzyme? Why is that even important? Then I got the answer, which is, holy cow, it's the fundamental piece that keeps your DNA silenced, which means you're going to get better expression of the DNA as you go. And so that was a big aha moment for me. And then I started asking about other peptides. Well, what about these growth hormones, secretagogues? And last night, we gave a big challenge on growth hormone, and we're going to jump into some natural ways that you can increase your growth hormone. But man, if you think about all of the benefits, growth hormone therapy itself can be very dangerous. But if you say, well, why is growth hormone so important? Well, it's one of the most important things you can do because growth hormone helps your joints, it helps your ligaments. Every system in your body, every cell in your body depends on growth hormone. But if you're just using exogenous or growth hormone from an outside source to stimulate growth hormone, then that's going to be problematic, because then your body's own internal or endogenous supply of growth hormone starts to dwindle. And then it says, oh, well, that makes perfect sense. So what if there's a way that we could stimulate growth hormone in a short-term fashion so that you can still get those mTOR and AMPK pathways, those stay optimized, so that you get cellular autophagy, you clean up the DNA, but you don't go in this constant growth stage, because that can lead to other problems. But the way that peptides work is they just give it a short little burst of growth hormone, similar to the way that we had it when we were kids. And these peptides work so well because they're short acting. And so just by asking the question, well, isn't growth hormone, if we're stimulating all the time, isn't that dangerous? But if you take a step back and you ask the deeper question, well, what could we really do to move the needle on growth hormone without putting the body under risk and actually starting to reverse disease by having optimal levels of growth hormone? That's where these peptides come into play. And so there's just thousands of questions that we can ask when it comes to learning new things about health, learning new things about life. And so I thought today it would be, hopefully we can go on this, we take a little bit of a journey on what some of my reflections have been over the years and in my practice. And so as I kind of go back, and if I look back and appreciate some of the things about my life, because once again, this podcast is and it's basic. It's about being confident in your past so that you can be ambitious about your future. And how many of you have had something that has happened in your past that's given you a huge confidence and a boost in your future? I know many of you, I could see your names on here, and if I had your permission, I could share your story. But every single one of you that I've worked with directly, and there's a lot of you on here, so I don't know everybody, but every single one of you that I've worked with directly that I recognize, you've made such incredible progress. And so I'm going to ask you to go back, and because you're always forward, future facing. And so we're always thinking, like, what is it that I haven't done that's getting in the way of my progress? And so I'm going to ask you to go back into your past first and say, what is it that you can be confident about in your past that you've already done, so that is jet fuel for your future. And so I know some of you have, lost 40 pounds. I know some of you couldn't go on that 10-mile hike, and now you're going on the hike. I've actually seen some of you ladies on here doing push-ups when you couldn't do a push-up before, and now you're doing full-on push-ups, and you're doing these 3-minute planks, and you just look so much younger, and it's so inspiring to see. And so what an incredible journey that's been to see the transformation that each one of you have made in your life, because I think that's one of the things we forget. And so once again, the theme of the podcast today is, looking at your past. And so you can't get somebody, this is a quote from Dan Sullivan, you won't get somebody ambitious about their future unless they can be confident in their past. And so the same way that we reframe our future and we set goals and we capture a vision for the future, you can do the same thing for your past. And when it comes to your health, I think it's one of the most important things is to start appreciating all of the beautiful things that your physicality, your body's done for you, your mind's done for you, so that you can start to change that DNA expression. And then if you look at, how you can accelerate the process, I've shared with you my journey and my understanding. One of my deep learnings on the no death by neglect is I remember running the lab for a patient, and this patient's GFR was like 16. It was dangerously low. And then we looked at his cardiovascular markers. He had massive levels of fatty liver disease, and he had no idea. And so when we sent him out, he actually, when he ended up getting this angiogram, and he had his LAD, which is like the widowmaker artery. I was so glad that we sent him for medical care, because there's just too many things going wrong in his labs, but we sent him for medical care. And he had his LAD was 100% occluded. I mean, he was just like days away from a massive heart attack. And that's when I realized, like, so often we fool ourselves into thinking everything's okay. And we have, and you look at him from the surface and yeah, he had a little bit of a gut, but he had way too much stress and wasn't eating great. But I would have never imagined that his labs would have looked like that. So that was a big moment where I said, man, I've got to make sure that we're looking deeper at things. I've shared the story about my dad. He was 10 feet away from dying. He was at Cade's motocross race, watering the track. And all of a sudden he got the shortness of breath. He had the pain radiating down his left arm. And he just, realized like, oh man, I need help. This isn't going away. And so there's an ambulance 10 feet away from him. And as he got to the paramedics, he was able to get rushed to the hospital. And that evening they cracked open his heart and they found he had 4 major carotid arteries that were completely blocked. And so that saved my dad's life. But I also look and I said, man, my dad he was almost my age. I mean, he was like 5 years older than I am now, maybe 6 years. And that was after he just had a full physical. And so, and not in that bad of shape, but once again, he wasn't getting the right tests ordered. He didn't have a mentor. He had nobody really holding him accountable when it came to his health. And I can't imagine how much better off if my dad would be now. And he's still alive. He's super healthy, mountain bikes all the time, but doesn't have the energy that he used to, in his 70s. But I can't imagine if he would have, circumvented that problem in the first place. I think his energy would be twice as what it is today. If I had the tools that I had back then to help transform my dad's life so that he had better health now, if I could go back in time, and give everything, that's what I would do. And so I think we all have to look at our health through that lens. And it's that proverb, when's the best time to plant a tree? And we'd say, well, the best time is today. Well, actually it was 20 years ago. And so, if you planted the tree 20 years ago, and I meant, many of you have been on this journey with me almost 20 years, and I can't thank you enough for that. But if we can go back in time and we can say, okay, how do we make our next decade the best decade? Well, I think the best way is we go back 10 years and we start saying, what is it? What is the advice I would have given myself? And then we start executing on that advice today so that we plant that tree so that the next 10 years you arrive in a condition that's incredibly robust, healthier than you've ever been. Where you've got the balance, the fitness, you've got the mindset, you've got the happiness, you've got that joy in life, you've got the confidence you're going to have another great 10 years. I think that's really what this life and this journey and what we do at East West, this is what it's all about, is helping you create a bigger future, more ambitious future for yourself. And recognizing, studying with Dan Sullivan, one of the ways that I've been able to have him mentor me and take personal interest is because I took personal interest in his big goal, which is to live to be 156. And so that, because I was able to add value to his life and share new insights on what I was learning, it allowed me to get a front row seat where there's thousands of entrepreneurs who would love to have the relationship I do with Dan. And I'm not, this has nothing to do with me or ego or anything else. It's just that I learned what he needs to take the next step in his health. And I was able to provide him with enough new things that help move the needle for him, that he's taken personal interest in me, which I really appreciate. And then I can learn even deeper things from Dan by being in these groups and being in the right place at the right time. And so my encouragement to you is, as you go back into the past, one of the big things that helps us is if we learn how to learn from the right people at the right time. And then that also means we got to turn off the distractions, get rid of the social media. I am not on like the TikTok world and the Instagram world, but when you're scrolling through these just constant images, it's very hard to have something stick where you can actually really learn from it. I think we're doing damage to our brains. Much better to just find a place, you really dig in, get grounded with that, and then find live humans to interact with. And this is one of the opportunities that I've created for everybody in our community, and is the ability to come and learn from me and from all of the team in person. And this is why we've started hosting these peak state longevity retreats. the very first one that we did was right before COVID, and then COVID kind of shut down our capabilities of meeting as groups. But then we kicked those back off last year. And the insights that people have when they come in person, and when you can actually start writing down your health goals and you get really clear on where you want to go in your life, those are the funnest things that I'm doing right now in my career, because I've found that some of the best learning opportunities for me have happened when I'm in a group with like-minded individuals who are all have the same purpose in mind. And at these retreats, it's everybody in the room are people who are 100% dedicated to helping improve their own health and then helping improve the lives of others. And so at the last retreat we hosted, which was just last week with Brian Sweet and his crew, that was really fun because we had, someone brought their grandson, and he had this huge awakening as he's writing out his goals. And he started recognizing, like, oh man, I'm 16, but what am I going to look like when I'm 26? And then he started identifying some of the behaviors and habits that he had without anyone lecturing him. Imagine being a 16-year-old and you suddenly realize that, oh yeah, the soda that I drink is probably not good for me. Or, that Red Bull that my friends all drink, that may actually be doing a lot of damage versus giving me wings, or whatever their slogan is. I think it's something like giving me wings, but it's so cool to see that. And so for those of you who are really at that place where you want to learn more things, you want to go deeper in your health, then don't miss out on this opportunity. We do typically we fill up. These are very small groups. Typically, we don't like to have more than about 15 people. We want to keep it intimate. At these longevity retreats, you get a chance to really learn from the best of the best, but more importantly, you learn from yourself. And I think your experience, you are a master of your own experience when you take the time to reflect on it, and that's when you can really accelerate your health and your journeys, your enjoyment in the journey. So if you're looking to take your health to the next level, if you're ready to, take the dive, the very first thing you want to do is we want to get your blood work ran before any of these events. And if you live outside of the state, traveling to Utah, it's an easy flight. We're 10 minutes from the airport. If traveling here doesn't really suit you, then you can still get your blood work ran. That's the first step, is run our advanced longevity panel. And then you can really start diving into where your deficiencies are, where the interferences are, and helping you live your best life. So I appreciate each one of you. Because Kate asked me to give a peptide of the day, and I want to make sure that we do that for all you peptide nerds out there. The peptide of the day is MK677, ibutamoren. It's a phenomenal peptide because it works on it's a growth hormone releasing peptide 6, and it actually is one of the best peptides for building muscle. There's been interesting research that I read in the Hack last night, where it's shown to help people who have like wasting and thirsting disorders. They did this study in Japan, and they found that people who were, had weight loss, they couldn't sustain muscle. They couldn't, they didn't have any growth in their body, and they were just kind of withering away. And usually it was from some type of infection or blood sugar dysregulation, some type of, almost like type 1 diabetes. What they found is, in using this, they were able to gain 9% more lean muscle mass. They were able to start thriving again. Sleep was improved. They did a group with placebo versus the MK677 group, and they found that the patients who used MK677 had like a 30% greater delta sleep. So that deep sleep waves improved by 30%. They found that people had more energy. Their immune system was activated. So if you've not tried this one, phenomenal peptide. So that's your peptide of the day. And I really appreciate you guys, and hope you enjoyed this episode. At least it gives you something to start thinking about when it comes to your future health. And so thank you all so much. Love you guys, and we'll see you next week.